Today we're talking about one of the big four of last patch, and by big four I mean the gods that received major changes to their kit that really drastically changed how they played, how they feel, how they perform. And today's one is Thor. Thor received not only buffs but also an overhaul to one of his abilities. We're gonna look into this and maybe we'll rant about it a little bit as well because it kinda deserves it, but we'll get to that. First of all, what were the changes? There was a minor fix to his first ability, Mjolnir's Attunement, which was more about the double tap not hitting properly. This is now fixed and it will always hit. But the bigger change is most definitely in the 3. The 3, Berserker Barrage, received a complete rework, whereas beforehand it was a very long spin with relatively low damage per tick, but a lot of damage and scaling overall. It's now much shorter with a lot more impact, a lot more oomph behind it immediately, but you also don't have that extended CC immunity or knockup immunity anymore. So what happens now is Thor spins his hammer essentially 3 times. And the first 2 times will deal a fair bit of damage. They deal 20 to 100 depending on the rank, plus 45% scaling. And then the third swing deals a little bit more damage, 45 to 125 plus 60% scaling. That all happens within ever so slightly more than a second. Thor is still knockup immune during this time, but again, it's significantly shorter overall. The cooldown of the ability at the same time was decreased from 11 seconds to 8 seconds. It's worth keeping in mind that with the ability being shorter and the cooldown applying after the ability animation finished, that overall means you can use the ability a fair bit more often. So that is one part of his buff. The other part is Anvil of Dawn, the ultimate, where after landing, Thor gets a charged up hammer for 6 seconds. And in this state, each basic attack and ability will cause a chain lightning to hit nearby enemy gods and damages them with each hit. The initial targets takes 20 to 60 plus 15% of your physical power as damage per chain lightning, and the chain targets after that take 10 to 30 plus 7.5% of your physical power per chain lightning in damage. So it's sort of a short range, high base damage, low scaling version of Odysseus' bow. So only 2 major changes, but these changes are so major that they completely reclassify Thor essentially. Beforehand, Thor was more of this utility-based helper assassin towards late game who sets up a lot with CC and doesn't do much else. That is no longer the case. He still has his early aggression, that's higher than before, but in late game he can most definitely build and play more aggressive now as well. That is especially due to the fact that his combo is now significantly quicker. Technically, what you can do is if you hit someone with the ult, you use your 1 immediately and go right into the 3 and try to hit both, and you will burst enemies for insane amounts of damage without even having to use the wall, unless they have some super quick mobility. They will take significantly higher burst damage, not only from the fact that Berserker Barrage is super quick now, but also from the fact that you give them additional procs of damage through the lightning from his ultimate. So there's a whole lot of burst behind that. The lightning itself also increases his teamfight damage drastically. He had decent enough teamfight utility beforehand through the CC, but with this AoE damage going around, that's another factor that's definitely worth keeping in mind. Are there any downsides to the changes? Well, technically, yes. You will have a way shorter knockup and knockback immunity through the 3, which you could abuse beforehand, and you will also lose some damage on the 3 compared to if you were able to hit the full ability on someone. Thing is, before this change, most people would not hit the full ability on most targets anyway, so that's not that relevant. Now, I don't want to give my full opinion just yet, because before I do that, I want to show you some numbers here. I want to show you some stats that compare the damage of Thor to the damage of Susanoo. Now, Susanoo is a damage-based assassin, similar to Thor. He also comes with a fair bit of utility, but for him the utility is more about setting up more damage, where Thor's utility on one hand sets up more damage, but on the other hand is also pretty good at disruption. I left the ults out of this comparison because they're a bit more situational. With Susanoo, you have the whole charge up thing. With Thor, the exact damage depends a lot on how many lightning bolts you hit afterwards, how many charges. Overall, Thor should come out on top here in most situations as long as he hits some other abilities after the ultimate. But again, that's not what I want to compare. What I want to compare is the base kit. In Thor's case, that is 630 base damage on the 1 if you hit both taps, and 90% scaling on a cooldown of 12 seconds. This is all at max ranks, so all the cooldowns will be at the lowest point possible as well. Thor's 2 doesn't come with damage, but has 15 seconds cooldown. Thor's 3 comes with 345 base damage and 140% scaling with an 8-second cooldown. I think it's very interesting to especially look at Thor's 3 in comparison to Susanoo's 1. I know that in many cases it's not good to directly compare kits like this and abilities like this, but in this case it actually makes a lot of sense. Both have this big AoE damaging ability and both have a mobility damaging ability, and then both have a setup utility ability, which in Susanoo's case also does damage. And the big AoE damage ability for Thor is the 3, and for Susanoo it is the 1. And Susanoo's 1, if you really spam it without using any attack cancelling or anything in between, will only be slightly slower than Thor's 3. I tested it, it's a minor difference in favor of Thor, but it's pretty close. They're both 1 second and a little bit. Susanoo's 1 comes out at 350 base damage, so 5 more, and 137.5 scaling, so 2.5 less scaling. So very, very similar in damage between these two abilities here. And I think that's interesting because on one hand, of course, you have the benefit for Susanoo that you can attack cancel in between, you have a little bit of mobility, but on the other hand, with Thor, you don't need to time things regarding attack cancelling, and you can use other abilities a little bit quicker. You also have that knock-up immunity, and you also don't have to reposition like you do with Susanoo, which can in some situations be pretty frustrating. You also have an easier time applying all the AoE damage on multiple targets, so both have their pros and cons. The big difference with Susanoo's ability here is it has 12 seconds cooldown, so 1.5 times as much, and I think that is worth noting. Susanoo's 2 has 180 base damage, 60% scaling on a 16 seconds cooldown, and the 3 has 240 base damage with all ticks, 120% scaling, and 16 seconds cooldown. In total, this comes down to 975 base damage for Thor and 770 for Susanoo, but 230% scaling for Thor and 317.5 scaling for Susanoo. In other words, one works better with pen, the other works better with power, one does a little bit more in early game, the other one does a little bit more in late game. But a key difference is that the cooldown between their 1 and 3, so their most damaging abilities, for Thor is 20 and for Susanoo is 28. And also that Thor only uses 2 damaging abilities for all this and has the utility of the wall on top of that, where Susanoo gets a little bit of a pull for the damage, and if that wasn't there, he would significantly fall off in damage compared to Thor. And that seems a little bit odd to me. Do you know another assassin ability that has an 8-second base cooldown and deals decent damage? I do, because I used to play her all the time, and that's a Willis 2. The difference is that for a Willis to have slightly higher base damage than Thor while still having significantly lower scaling, she needs to use basic attacks on the enemies first to even get the multiplier. And this is what justifies the short cooldown on this ability, that there is more conditions around it, that this is her main damaging, main setup ability, everything revolves around it, and that you really have to be in a close melee range and hit those basics first. That's not the case for Thor. He just slams that thing out every 8 seconds, no matter what's happening. And in case you're wondering what that has done for his stats, let's look at them. First of all, we can look at all ranks of ranked. We can see here that his win rate is actually not insanely high with 49.39%. That's still a 2% increase over his previous win rate though. But if you look at his pick and ban rate, that went up by 53% to 63.71%. And if you look at his win rate a little bit more closely, you can see that by far the worst win rate is in bronze, which may or may not be down to the fact that Thor is a free god, meaning that a lot of people that don't play any junglers, don't have any gods, will simply pick Thor in bronze because they don't have any other gods and they are probably not very good with him if that's the only assassin they have. So based on that, it's safe to assume that maybe these stats don't deliver us that much and maybe casual stats have that same bias to some degree. But if we look at Diamond Plus, then we get a very different picture. The win rate here is 51.6% and went up by 6.47% since last patch, which is pretty huge. His pick and ban rate here is 72.87%, so a 59% increase. That is pretty crazy and brings him to the top area of the pick and ban rate with his changes. And what do I mean by that? He shares this area with gods like Kronos, the goddess of demonetization, Nike, and Merlin. And 2 of these gods are part of the big 4 of the last patch anyways, because they received major changes. Kronos already has nerfs on the way in various ways, not only to him directly, but also to items surrounding him. And Merlin, well, he's still Merlin. So from a point of balance, there is work to do with Thor, as well as some of the other gods up here. And I find it a bit unfortunate that nothing is happening in the upcoming patch, which means we'll have to accept this version of Thor for quite a while longer. Apparently the devs want to go over him in the dev insight, but I really think that Thor should have received a minor nerf in this patch. I don't think he should have received a major nerf, and people have rightfully pointed out that Thor was basically non-existent in the meta for seasons and deserves some time in the spotlight. And I'm completely okay with that. I'm just not okay with him being the most contested assassin pick all the time and seeing him in basically every other game and just being super annoyed with him. I would just like to have a god that performs well and maybe a bit above average, but is not too easy to play. And I have proof that he is too easy to play, which are my recent Thor games. If you look at them, I went positive in every single one of them, even though I didn't win every single one of them, partially because of DCs or trying weird items. But the point why this is so relevant is because I'm an absolutely awful Thor player. I don't enjoy playing Thor and I don't play him much at all. As much as he's a god that you get very early, he's also a god that requires quite a fair bit to master his mechanics, and I never did that. But right now you don't need to. Because the 3 itself is super easy to confirm and on a super short cooldown, and you can just basic attack people and hit your 3 occasionally and then try to hit maybe one part of the 1, and that is enough. And that's not how Thor should work, and that's this kind of same symptom that we had with Ullr a while ago, where the kid was just dumbed down for no reason. And that most definitely doesn't benefit anyone seriously enjoying Thor and regularly playing him, because it means that various other people are just gonna try and snag him from you as well. So I don't think it is a good idea. I think a minor nerf that could be done to him very easily is increasing the cooldown of the 3 or decreasing the scaling of the 3 ever so slightly, maybe just a 1 second increase, and see how he works with that. See how he goes from there. See if his ban rate drops a little bit and maybe his performance drops a little bit, so he's on a more level. I like to be able to play Thor without feeling scummy for it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, how you feel about Thor and everything about him. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It helps me out. And other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.